Thank you, everybody, for being here. And also thank you for everybody being on Zoom. There are a bunch of people that weren't able to be here this evening. So we're glad they're able to join us on Zoom. First of all, thank you, everybody, for being here this evening. It's kind of hard to believe, and it kind of makes it very emotional that Rabbi Marcus is actually, I know, his first Yarzheit, and it's very hard to believe that a year has gone by. Rabbi Marcus's memory will, as you know, will be with us forever. And he is, in every place we've gone and heard about, Rabbi Marcus has actually been, you keep hearing his name all over the community. Everywhere you go, especially this past year, we've had the opportunity to hear lots of stories about Rabbi Marcus, about what he has done, everything from greater Metro West work to the mikveh, to the Erev, to the shul, to the community. It's really quite amazing. And so I know that Mrs. Marcus has heard over and over many stories, and we know that we are going to hear some stories this evening as well. So tonight, first of all, please enjoy the appetizer while we have the speeches. I know it's hard to believe. We said we're going to start the speech at 7:30, so we are starting exactly on time. So because I want to make sure that people on Zoom have this opportunity. So first of all, we want to kick off the evening with Rabbi Zwickler, who is going to kick off this commemoration.
Bereshus, Mrs. Marcus family, Rabbi Klar, Rabbi Spivak, Rabbi Sharbat, of course. Hope I'm not missing any of the Rabbanim who are here. And everyone who's gathered here at this special evening, which is really an evening of celebration. In that once the Yarzheit comes, it's no longer a period of mourning, but it's the ability, it's the time to look back, to celebrate not just the life of an individual, but to celebrate the life of a pillar of our community. The bedrock. Everything that we have here is from the vision of Rabbi Marcus, and the blessings that we have as a community stem from his vision and his hard work. This week's Parsha, Parshas Bo, contains within it the message for generations, the message of the Seder night. V'higadata levincha bayom hahu lemor. Hashem says, and you shall tell for your children, for generations and generations to come. And we know that even those who aren't affiliated, who are Jews, have two things that certainly they don't skip, and that's Yom Kippur and the Seder night. And tonight we have that V'higadata levincha to tell the next generation just what it means to be a community leader, to build a community, to be a Rav, to be a confidant, to be a friend. Because all of us, and I speak for myself, Rabbi Sharbat, and I think all of our generation, we stand as we try to guide a community on the shoulders of a giant. And that's who Rabbi Marcus was, but not a giant simply for our shul, but a giant, as Larry mentioned, for the greater Metro West community. Rabbi Marcus was someone who, above and beyond anything else, represented the words that are written outside this building, where Dr. and Mrs. Kukin, Aleichem Hashalom, dedicated this building in Rabbi Marcus's honor. Oheves Abrios. He was a person who loved others, all human beings. Umakarvan la Torah, and brought them close to Torah. But I would add that Rabbi Marcus was someone who was Ohev Shalom v'Rodev Shalom. He was not a Kohen. but he certainly could have been one. And for Rabbi Marcus, shalom is what needed to prevail. And I remember even in the later years where it was very difficult for Rabbi Marcus to speak, the one thing that he always wanted to see in his shul was shalom. For people to put away and put aside sometimes things that they are offended by for the greater good of a shul, Torah, of a community. A couple of months ago, Josh sent me a voice note, which was actually a recording of a shir that he found of Rabbi Marcus. And while for many of you here remember Rabbi Marcus prior to 1998, where he was able to speak and give a shir, it was the first and I took away from listening to Rabbi Marcus, and I think there's going to be a little presentation tonight as well, of hearing him speak and hearing him give a shir was the inspiration that he was able to give over to others with his words. But we all know that Rabbi Marcus inspired people not simply by his words, but by his actions, about how he led, about how he presented himself, about a vision and a belief in every individual, and finding that nitzotz, finding that little spark of holiness with each individual and cultivating that holiness to be able to build the community that we have because of it. And I'm very proud and happy to announce tonight, with the bracha of Mrs. Marcus, that we as a community, as a shul, will be establishing the Rabbi Alvin Marcus Zechrono Livracha Legacy Fund of Congregation A, B, J, and D, which will be guided by the rabbis together with the Marcus family. And the fund will provide ongoing financial support for initiatives, programs, and infrastructure to support Rabbi Marcus's vision and mission of cultivating and growing a vibrant Torah community in West Orange. And under the leadership of Ilan Rosenraum, the shul's president, together with Harvey Bell, who has already pledged $25,000, we look forward to sharing more detailed information as well as instructions on how to contribute in the coming weeks. We want to make sure that Rabbi Marcus's and Mrs. Marcus's vision for what the shul was, is, and should be in the future is preserved here in our community, and that his memory is everlasting, not only on the front door, but by the community, the way we live, the way we act, the chesed that we do, and the Torah and the tefillah that takes place in this building. I remember at the Rabbi Marcus's funeral, I mentioned that when I look at these walls, I almost see Rabbi Marcus speaking from them. And I think that not a day goes by for any of us who knew Rabbi Marcus and knew his contribution to our community that we don't feel his presence here. And so while tonight, in commemoration of his Yarzheit, in celebration of his life, we remember all that he did for us, and may his neshama have an aliyah. Rabbi Marcus is eternally with us. And Emir Hashem, we hope that for many years to come, Tibat L'chaim, Mrs. Marcus continues to lead us, and with the legacy of Rabbi Marcus that he left us, that we continue to grow as the Kehillah Kedosha that he established and wanted us to be. Thank you.
Rabbi Zechrono, thank you so much for those beautiful words. a few weeks ago, the shul had a little flood here a few weeks ago, if you remember. And literally a week before that we realized that there was a lot of Rabbi Marcus memorabilia that was sitting in his office. We kind of really said, we really should do something with it. And we should really kind of, take care of it. So Panita Popek and I kind of worked together and we got it all together and we actually shipped it over and we actually removed it from the shul. Little do we know that, thank God, we actually did that. So we actually kept a lot of memorabilia that Rabbi Marcus had, and it's actually in some people's houses right now. Some of it's in Mrs. Marcus's house, but we actually acquired a lot of the memorabilia. So I guess through Rabbi Marcus's inspiration, he made sure that we saved his memory before we had the little flood a few weeks later. And so hopefully we'll get to enjoy it. Also, if you also were in the lobby, you will see that about 10 years ago, or maybe more, we did we honored Rabbi and Mrs. Marcus, and actually that material that was put together by Molly Schwartz. Molly Schwartz did call today to remember that she wanted to remind everybody how critical she has been part of and she's been our history of our shul, and she's been happy to do that. And she has many more memorabilia as well. And so, of course, I asked Robert Ben Ramon tonight to see if he could actually do something and preserve everything that we have in the lobby today. So, but do take a look at the pictures in the lobby. It is really an amazing sight to see what Rabbi Marcus and Mrs. Marcus have done for our community. Next speaker is a family member. It is Shia Marcus, one of Rabbi and Mrs. Marcus's sons.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you, Rabbi Zwickler. And thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. It means a lot to our family. I'd like to talk about a question that was asked regarding the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim was a big tzaddik, and he was known as a very righteous man. So the question was asked, why was he known as a tzaddik? After all, he was a giant Talmudic scholar. Why wasn't he known as a Talmid Chacham? And so the answer was given that he prayed. He was a very modest man, and he prayed that his great Talmudic knowledge be hidden from the public. And his prayers were answered. So the next obvious question, if he's such a modest and humble man, why didn't he pray that his being known as a tzaddik be hidden from the community and from everybody? And the answer was because he didn't know he was a tzaddik. After my father passed away, people started to tell me stories about my father. Many stories. At some point, they became too numerous for me to even keep track of. Every story basically started with something like, "You don't understand. You don't understand." And they proceeded to tell me some amazing, extraordinary, remarkable act of kindness that my father did for them. Stories that were just unbelievable. Some were life-changing. Unbelievable acts of chesed by my father. And what was amazing, everyone assumed, I never heard a single story. Everyone assumed that when they were telling me the story, it was the first time I was hearing the story with them. And the truth of the matter is, was that I didn't know a single story. My father never told me one story. No matter how profound, no matter how amazing, no matter how life-changing, no matter how much energy it took out of him, he never mentioned one story, ever. And he liked to talk to me about a lot of stories. He'd talk about chesed and kindness all the time. He'd talk about my mother. He'd talk about his father. He'd talk about his mother. He'd talk about his father-in-law. He'd talk about my brothers. And he'd talk about humility and modesty all the time. There was one story he loved. He kept telling me all the time, the story about the Prime Minister of Israel, Golda Meir. She once told a cabinet minister, "Don't be so humble. You're not that great." He loved that story. That was a story that talked to him, because he knew, being modest and humble was a tricky business, a balancing act. And if you thought you're very humble, maybe you're not that humble. In any event, my father never thought any of his acts of kindness and generosity deserved any recognition or honor, just the opposite. He thought that was standard operating procedure. He would never think he was a righteous person or better than anyone else, certainly not a tzaddik. There was one story, though, that I did know when the person came and told me that one story, but not from my father. My father never talked about himself. There was one story in the last few months of my mother's life. My mother told me a story. But my mother, it was the last few months of my father's life, and I thought my mother was exaggerating. The story was so remarkable that I thought, if this was really true, they'd make a movie. My father couldn't have done that, even my father. That was too over the top. So my mother was embellishing the story a little bit, and I just said, "Ma, that's amazing, great." But during the Shiva, a family came in, and I did not know the family. They came in, and the father sat down in front of me, and he started to tell me the story, word for word, exactly like my mother had told me a few months previously. So, first of all, I just want to say, no one should ever doubt my mother. She knows what she's talking about. And no one knows my father like my mother. I won't divulge any of the stories. It's not for me to tell. Many were very personal. But in the end, all the stories really would have been great movies. They were just remarkable acts of kindness from my father. And I want to say, my father every day consciously tried to practice loving kindness. He wasn't perfect. He was a human being like all of us. He made mistakes. He did his best. But every single day, he consciously tried his best to be kind to everyone. He tried to respect everyone. And, when I grew up, a lot of people would say, "Oh, there's a big conflict. We got not only in West Orange. My father was known as like a compromiser. He could negotiate." And people would say, "We got to get your father to solve this problem." It wasn't my father was such a great negotiator. He was a person who respected everyone and respected everyone's opinions and respected everybody for what they were. And, that gave him a lot of strength. It helped him in life because he had a balance that he knew that being kind to people was good for him, and it was also good for the person. He just wanted to do as best he could. And that was his motto: do the best you can every day. He wasn't perfect, but he was a very righteous, serious person that tried to do good every day. And hopefully, the way he lived his life in public and in private, and we all watched him every day, the way he lived his life, hopefully that will be a great source of comfort and strength and inspiration to our entire family and to the entire community here in West Orange. Thank you.
Shai, thank you so much. You hear these great stories by Ray Marcus, and it's true. We don't know all the we don't know all the details and the secrets behind the scenes. So, but he's the one that made our community. I do also still want to say thank you to the extended Marcus family. All week I've been hearing about who's coming, and thank you, Connie, for coordinating to make sure everybody would be here today. So thank you very much for connecting. Next person is going to speak is a grandson, Aaron Marcus.
Thank you. I do have to challenge my uncle for a second though, because I think my grandpa was perfect, so. Sorry. There's a lot I can talk about when it comes to my grandfather. And first of all, I do want to thank everyone for being here. Before I start talking about my grandfather, I think nothing else would give him joy like seeing so many people here in this room, in this shul. I'm sorry, I can't ever talk about my grandpa without getting emotional. It's this shul and this room that, you know, I really see him in the most. You know, making kiddush for the shul or running around wheeling those basketball hoops out. Doing everything. So it's you know, I feel really what Rabbi Zwickler said about, you know, his essence here. And there's so many things I can say about him. I don't even know where to start. You know, he was the most humble person I've ever met. He believed in people more than anyone I've ever met. And he cared about people more than anyone I've ever met. He cared about people in a sense that not a lot of other people can do. He cared about everybody. I mean, everybody, all the time. If they were nasty, he cared about them. If they were amazing, he cared about them. He made every person feel like they were the center of the universe. It's really something that I wish we could all live up to. I know I definitely cannot live up to that, but I know that if I can, you know, somehow channel that in my everyday life and bring that with me, I have a piece of my grandfather with me everywhere I go. I do want to talk also about this community, West Orange. You know, this is the place after Hashem and his family that he, you know, loved probably the most. Israel close behind. This community was the essence of the purpose in his life. He channeled everything that he believed about Judaism and put it 100% into West Orange. West Orange is a place that is unlike any other place that I've experienced. It's a testament that my best friends are still the kids that I grew up with today on Crestwood. They're still the kids that I went to high school with and middle school with, pre-K with. It's West Orange. It was West Orange that made that possible. My grandfather is responsible for every single amazing friendship that I have in my life. There's not a lot of people, I think, that can say that about their family members, but every single part of who I am comes from my grandfather. I know that as a kid, I was, you know, a rabble rouser. Wasn't always the best in onegs. But my grandfather would always just ask me, what can I do to make you enjoy oneg more? What can I do to make you enjoy the groups more? What do the other 8-year-olds think? He really cared. I'll never forget the last conversation I had with him before he had a stroke in 1998. We're sitting at my grandparents' Shabbos table for lunch, like we did almost every single week. And he asked me, that's an alarm of mine, and it was West Virginia. I'll never forget sitting at that Shabbos table and my grandfather asking me, you know, Aaron, I know you don't like going to oneg. Why don't you like going? And I would say, well, my friends don't like going. And he said, well, why don't your friends like going? He always tried to make everything better in the shul. If there was a problem, he wanted to fix it. It's really, West Orange is that idealistic place. It's something that you don't fully appreciate, by the way, until you leave West Orange. And you search nonstop for those friendships and those homes and your neighbors that you can walk into their house at any time of day, any time of the night. Literally, any time of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, it doesn't matter. You are always searching. And you think when you go outside of this community that it's normal, that everybody had this type of upbringing, that everyone is 30 years old and their best friend grew up next door to them. But it's not true. It's not true. And people, it's funny, there's this West Orange crew of people my age that, we talk about growing up here. We all now have different lives. We live in different parts of the country and the world. And every time we talk about West Orange, the other people who aren't from here think we're making it up. They think we're like, embellishing our upbringing. Like I know everyone here probably has seen The Sandlot as a movie, but The Sandlot has nothing on West Orange. This place brought people together like no other place I've ever experienced in my life. And the center of that was this shul. And it is this shul that keeps people together. It's this shul that is the epicenter of everything. It's why places like Livingston exist and Springfield. This shul, West Orange. West Orange was a place that people came to from Newark, from New York City. No other place did what they did here in West Orange. So when I think of community and I think of the shul, I think of course, a legal term, community property, right? Community property is this legal idea that no matter how much you put into a marriage, right, you're going to get 50%, right? You're always going to get 50%. Doesn't matter if you put in a lot, doesn't matter if you put in a little, you're going to get 50%. So there's never, ever a reason to not put in 100% all the time. Because when you put in 100% to any type of relationship at any point in time, the result can be this. The result could be this shul. It can be the future. It's something that is more important than anything else. You don't see shuls like this anywhere else in the world. And it is the greatest joy I've had in my life. And that comes from my grandfather. I can't, talk about my grandfather without talking about how my grandmother also has been there, was by his side every step of the way, pushing my grandfather nonstop to continue living his life the way he did until the very end. My parents also, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins. This family is amazing, and it's encompassed through all of West Orange. So when I come here, I feel like I'm in the room with everyone that I've grown up with my entire life. And for many of you, that much is true. I see my preschool teachers here, my people that I probably ran away from during groups. I see everyone, and I thank you because I know that you've put in all of that work to make this shul what it is. I've started going to Minyan during the week, which I'm sure my grandfather would be very, very happy with. Doing so, I start reading, Chumash much more, which I know my grandfather would love too. So I did, just want to talk a little bit about a few weeks ago during Parshas Vayichi. I came across something that I had not come across before, although it's been there, for thousands of years. When Yaakov is discussing to his children what their purpose is going to be in life, he tells them everything that is going to happen from now until the end. This is the Jewish people. And then it continues that Yaakov dies. He passes away. After he tells his children, he passes away. But it's very interesting because the Torah doesn't say the same thing that it said for Abraham and Yitzchak. When Abraham dies, it says Abraham expired and then he died. And when Yitzchak died, it said Abraham expired and then he died. But for Yaakov, it doesn't say that. So Rashi says, just flat out, Yaakov didn't die. Which of course, it's not accepted custom, but the Gemara explains that what this means is that Yaakov's descendants are alive, and in the same manner, he is alive. And when I think of West Orange and when I think of my grandfather and grandpa, I am not comparing you to Yaakov Avinu. I'm sorry if that is embarrassing to you, but I'm not, although pretty close. I see the same type of experience that can exist in my grandfather here and with me. My grandfather can exist, not here physically, but he can exist inside of all of us. The greatest gift that he gave me and he gave this entire community are his values. And those values are things that he can pass on to his children and that they passed on to me and that I can pass on to my children and that we can all keep in mind for eternity. I know my grandpa loves this place and I love you all, and thank you so much for being here, because this really, more than anything else, just seeing you all here, I think would bring so much joy to my grandfather. So thank you.
Aaron, thank you very much. We have a special, very brief from my great grandchild. And this is Charlotte Ackerman. Scarlett, excuse me, Scarlett. Sorry, Charlotte. Sorry, Scarlett. There you go. Are you good?
Hi, my name is Scarlett Ackerman, and I miss Grandpa because I used to give him hugs, and it brings me and him joy. And when I go to Mrs. Marcus, I always see his wheelchair.
Thank you, Scarlett. So now we get to pièce de résistance, Marilyn Marcus. Marilyn is true, a woman of valor. Actually, I get to speak to Mrs. Marcus now, I think once or twice or three times a week. We get a chance to talk, and she's just an amazing woman. I've heard all these things about her all these years, and over the last years, I've got to know her more and more. She's amazing. She's beyond in control of the situation. She's beyond, right? She's beyond being there to help. And trust me, she's given me more coaching on the foodery than I could possibly ever want. You'd think I own the foodery for that event. But I just have to say she really, truly epitomizes the values of our community. And I want to introduce Mrs. Marilyn Marcus.
I'm going to repeat something that I haven't said here, but I did say when they had the memorial service for my husband in Israel. But I think it's was a very important part of his life. And that is, in the early part of our marriage, whenever I would say to him, Alvin, can I do this? Can I do that? Either he would say yes, or he'd say, man, it's not the Torah way. And soon I began to realize that every decision he made, whether for one of the children, whether for us as a family, whether for himself or whether for the community, he always asked himself that question first. Is it the Torah way? And then, and only then, did he make a decision. So you know what kind of a person he was. I'm going to tell you a few things about him tonight. I don't think you know, but things like, in addition to all the other things I really loved about him. So one of the first things that he really, really loved, when he was the rabbi, many people would knock on his door and say, "Rabbi, can I come in to see you?" And of course he said yes. And in their conversation, they would tell him a little bit of their past history, where they grew up, how they grew up, where they went to school. And he took all of these little stories and incidents, put them in the back of his mind, never told me them when he came home at night, but maybe 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years later, when a situation arose that was appropriate, he would say, "Man, so-and-so, do you know where he went to school? Man, so-and-so, you know where he grew up? You know what his background was?" And I realized that he enjoyed listening to these little stories from a community that he loved so much. And he continued to do that until the very end, I have to tell you. The second thing you may or may not know about him was that he loved to daven. So much so that Shabbos morning, when I would come down at 8 o'clock in the morning, he was already dressed, ready to go, waiting for Josh. And I'd say, "Alvin, I don't know if you can go today. It's raining, it's snowing, it's cold, it's hot." As if to say so. And he went. Unless he was in the hospital while he was ill, he never missed a Shabbos. He loved, loved, loved coming to shul. He loved davening. And once I asked him, "Alvin, why do you daven with the tallis over your head?" And he said, "Well, ma'am, what I do when I put the tallis over my head, I blot out everything that would normally bother me. Any talking, any noise, anything." And that's how he davened. But after he had the stroke and he no longer could come to shul in the morning to daven, he davened at home. And I saw a whole different side of him. Because when he davened at home, no sounds were allowed. No radio, no JM in the AM, no loud talking, nothing until he finished. And if it wasn't perfect silence, you got this. And we knew what he meant. So davening was a very, very, very big part and the love of his. One of the things I'd like to tell you that I know you don't know is that you don't know why he was called Rabbi, but I'll tell you. When my granddaughter Abigail was in kindergarten, the teacher once explained to them what a nickname was and what a real name was. And after she finished explaining, she said, "Does anyone know anyone that has a nickname?" And of course, Abigail raised her hand and she said, "Well, my grandpa, his real name is Grandpa. But some people call him by his nickname, which is Rabbi." Last thing I want to tell you is something that is very, very dear to me because from where it came. When my grandson, Aaron, was in kindergarten, remember Mrs. Gedgerman? Okay, Mrs. Gedgerman was his teacher. And one night I get a call from Mrs. Gedgerman, and she says, Mrs. Marcus, I have to tell you a story about your grandson. Okay. This is the story. She said, today in class, I explained to the children what a tzaddik was, how he carried himself, how he spoke, how he related to other people, how other people related to him. And when I got finished speaking, Aaron raises his hand and says, Mora, I know that man. I know a tzaddik. And she said, who is it? He said, my grandfather. And he was a tzaddik. I think we all know that. And tonight, we honor his memory. Avraham Mordechai ben Yeshayahu, Zchreinu Tzaddik B'Vracha.